The sun hung like a brand above Dry Creek, burning the color out of the sky. Heat shimmered over the dust, the horses stamping as if they too were restless to be done with the day. Folks lined the street, fanning themselves with hats or folded papers, murmuring behind hands. On the auction platform, the woman stood barefoot, toes curling against the splintered boards. She clutched the small hands of 4 boys, the littlest with his cheek pressed against her faded skirt. Her hair, once dark and thick, hung loose and dull around her face. She didn't look at the crowd, not to the left, not to the right. Her gaze was fixed somewhere beyond all of it, as though she could lure herself and her children into another world if she stared hard enough. A ripple of laughter cut through the murmur. "Too skinny to work," a woman said to her neighbor. "More mouths than hands," came a man's reply. The boys' shoulders curled inward, their chins ducking down. One twisted his fingers in the hem of his shirt. Elias Boone appeared like a shadow drifting in from the edge of town. Hat brim pulled low, dust on his boots. He leaned against a rail as if he'd come only to pass the time. People whispered. Boone hadn't set foot in Dry Creek for months. The last anyone heard, he'd been keeping himself out on the edge of nowhere, speaking to no one and wanting nothing. The auctioneer called for the first bid. Abel Garrison's voice carried over the crowd, sharp and oily. $2 for the boys, good barn hands. She can cook, maybe. His eyes raked over Miriam with lazy disdain, though she need feeding first. Laughter answered him, low and mean. Miriam's jaw tightened, but her grip on her boys didn't falter. 2.5, someone joked from the back. It was then that Elias spoke. His voice was quiet, but cut through the noise like a blade through cloth. 5. Heads turned. The auctioneer blinked, then nodded quickly. $5. Do I hear more? No one did, not even Abel. The hammer came down with a hollow thud, and the thing was done. Elias walked toward the platform, the boards creaking under his weight. He took the bundle of worn belongings from her hands. For a moment, they stood face to face. He said nothing, just offered a callous hand to help her down. She took it, her touch light as though afraid of taking too much. The crowd watched him cross to his wagon. No explanations, no smiles, just a creak of wheels as they rolled away from town. The ride was silent but heavy. The boys sat pressed close to their mother, their eyes flicking toward Elias now and then, ready for any sign of threat. Miriam sat straight-backed, chin lifted, though her fingers twisted in her skirt. She did not thank him. Pride or uncertainty held the words back. The land opened up before them in waves of brittle grass and open sky. His place was small, a squat house weathered by wind, with a corral leaning slightly to one side. The fence was mended in places where time had bitten through. It was not much, but it was kept. Miriam's first thought was a quiet, unspoken relief. No one will find us here. That night, the air cooled and the wind came soft over the plains. Elias sat on the porch, rolling a cigarette, the paper crackling faintly in his fingers. Inside, through the thin walls, he heard Miriam's voice, low and steady, telling a story to her boys. A few giggles spilled out, quick and shy. He lit the cigarette, the tip glowing in the dark, and stared at the horizon where the stars began to show. Smoke curled around him, slow and aimless. Somewhere in the middle of that wide, quiet space between the dark and the light, he wondered if he'd just brought trouble into his life, or something he'd been missing all along. The first morning, Miriam woke before the sun had fully stretched across the plains. The house was still, the boards cool under her bare feet. In the small kitchen, a pot of coffee sat warming on the stove, steam curling faintly in the dim light. Beside the door, a bucket of fresh water waited, the handle still wet as if just drawn. No note, no voice to claim the gesture, just a quiet provision, left without the need for thanks. By mid-morning, she and the boys were outside. The garden was small but stubborn, green fighting its way through dry soil. They pulled weeds, loosened earth, and gathered the eggs the hens had scattered. A rooster crowed like it owned the horizon. Across the yard, Elias worked on a leaning stretch of fence, shoulders moving in a rhythm that matched the swing of his hammer. He never looked over, but the boys did, their eyes tracking in between chores, curiosity flickering like small flames. A week passed before she returned to town. She kept her head high as she stepped into the mercantile, list in hand. The boys clustered close. Whispers rose like birds clinging to her dress. Boone bought himself charity trouble. She won't last through winter. At the flour sack, Abel Garrison leaned against the counter, a smirk bending his mouth. How long before he sends you packing, Mrs. Boone? His voice oozed the insult. Elias, standing near the back, had come in quietly, unnoticed until then. His eyes caught the words, but his face gave nothing away. He turned back to the shelves, as if they weren't worth the wait to reply. That evening, she sat by the lamp, mending one of his work shirts. The fabric was frayed along the sleeve, the tear clean and wide. She folded it neatly and left it on the porch rail before bed. The next morning, her boy's shoes sat by the door. Cleaned, oiled, the leather softened. No words were exchanged, but the trade was felt. The storm came without warning, rolling over the plains with violence that bent trees and rattled the windows. Rain slapped the roof in hard sheets. Miriam woke to the drip over the boy's bed, water pooling on the quilt. Before she could move, Elias was there, lifting the smallest boy into his arms, motioning for the others to follow. He laid them in his own bed, blankets pulled to their chins, then stretched himself out on the floorboards without a word. She stood in the doorway a moment too long, something tight in her chest. The next day, she caught him at the table, fingers brushing a worn photograph from his wallet. A woman, a child, faces faded by time and touch. His jaw clenched when he noticed her looking. Neither spoke. But the morning after, a small paper bag of hard candy appeared on the table. Her boys found it, wide-eyed, their laughter breaking through the walls like sunlight. They went to town again the following week. She had grown used to the stares, but Abel's voice still slid under her skin. How's the charity project, Boone? Elias ignored him, but she saw the way his eyes shifted, quick as a knife, then dulled again. That night, after the boys had gone to bed, she stood by the table, hands knotted together. Thank you, she said, the words awkward and small in the room. For buying me. He looked up from where he was oiling his saddle. Didn't buy you, he said after a pause. Bought a chance for something better. At dusk, the boys played in the yard, chasing each other in looping trails through the dust. Miriam leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, her face unreadable. Far off, Elias rode in from the pasture, the sun low behind him, painting the dust in gold. He swung down from the saddle, and one of the boys, without thinking, lifted a hand and waved. Elias paused, then touched his hat in reply. The moment was small enough to miss, but Miriam saw it, and she didn't look away. The day came dry and bright, the kind of morning when the wind carried nothing but the smell of sunburnt grass. Miriam was in the yard with the boys when the dust rose on the horizon. 3 riders. She knew one before his face came clear. Abel Garrison, leaning in the saddle with that lazy arrogance. 2 men flanking him. They reined in at the fence, Abel's eyes raking over the house before settling on her. Miriam, he drawled, you still owe me for the loan your late husband took. I figure the debt's about equal to what your boys could work off. Best you send them along quiet. The boys edged closer to her skirts. She didn't answer, just turned toward the porch. Elias was already there, stepping out of the shade, shotgun resting easy against his shoulder. He didn't raise his voice, didn't have to. Ain't no debt here worth the breath you're spending. Abel smirked, but there was a flicker in his eyes when Elias moved to stand between him and the house. The wind picked up, stirring the dust, the sound of leather creaking under Abel's grip. Miriam stepped forward, past Elias's shoulder, her chin lifted, her voice steady. You come back here again, Abel, I'll take it to the sheriff. You won't like how that ends. The boys were behind her now, for sets of wide eyes watching every word. For a moment no one moved. Then Abel spat in the dust, turned his horse, and rode off, his men following. The silence they left behind seemed bigger than before. Inside, Miriam's hands trembled as she pressed dough into shape, the soft thud of her palms against the bread loud in the small kitchen. Elias sat across from her, the shotgun leaning against the wall now. He watched her work a long moment before speaking. "Had a wife once," he said, "and a little girl. Lost them both to fever." His gaze dropped to the table. "Didn't figure I'd keep a family again. Figured I'd already lost that kind of thing for good." She didn't reply, just kept kneading, the rhythm of her hands steadying. Days passed. The air softened, the light coming longer in the evenings. Elias was fixing a hinge on the shed door when the youngest, Ben, wandered up, holding a nail in his small fist. "Here, Pa," he said, handing it over like it was the most natural thing in the world. The word hung there, warm and heavy. Elias froze, his hand closing around the nail slow, careful. Miriam stood in the doorway, a basket at her hip, eyes locked on him. For the first time, he didn't look away. Neither did she. Some folks will tell you a man can't buy love. Maybe they're right. Elias Boone didn't buy love that day in Dry Creek. He bought dust and dignity, hunger and hope, all tangled together in the hands of a too-thin widow. And somewhere between the creak of the porch boards and the small voice calling him Pa, he found he'd bought himself a home.